All right. Well, we are going to take about 20 minutes before our next session just to kind of unpack some of the things that we heard from Dr. Allen. Dr. Allen, thank you so much for kicking us off, getting us started. I loved the approach of just kind of looking at some of the typical challenges that we might face from people understanding the biblical basis for church membership. So I might want to just start there. Maybe I thought those 4 categories were really helpful. But if we're sitting here and we're pastoring a church that there's there's not going to be a uniform understanding of church membership. So if you're pastoring a church that has a variety of understandings of membership, some good, some bad, some are rooted in tradition, some are rooted in scripture, some are rooted in I just feel this way. Any advice on how to pastor a church that has that kind of variety of understanding on church membership to kind of bring unity and understanding as you teach what you just taught us in the first session?
Thank you so much. Am I on here? Thank you, Zach, for the kind words. Happy to tease this out for a moment here. I would say a few things. First of all, Baptists historically, and I speak as a Baptist to a room largely comprised of Baptists, what I'm going to say is applicable, I think, beyond even the Baptist tradition. But Baptists historically have understood the difference between the church essential and the church complete. Okay? You have the church essential, the rudimentary marks, preaching the word, administering the ordinances, etc. And then you have the church complete, which really will never be realized ultimately in this life, right? And then every congregation is somewhere on that spectrum. And so what we want to see, and for ourselves, our churches, yourselves, your churches, is churches moving down that continuum to greater and greater health. And the pace of that move, that's going to vary through a whole host of variables based upon the church's teachability, your own credibility. A host of variables, right? And so in this room, there's probably everyone here for a reason. You love the seminary, you love 9 Marks, the topic intrigues you. And what I'm sharing, there are probably largely a lot of yes and amens, but also thinking, okay, how do I implement this at my local church? And I would say, again, you're on a continuum. And where are your people? Where's your credibility? What have you been preaching on? What's the stage of your ministry? What is their experience, their context, previous pastors? The list goes on and on. But you want to be pursuing greater and greater faithfulness in regard to all of these things, especially church membership. The second thing I would say, beyond the church essential, church complete continuum, the second thing I would say is the first thing you need to do is nail down what you believe, what you will then teach, what your church believes, and what it will expect and teach, okay? So that's the first sphere, right? And then you're getting into whether it's people who are members or people who are visiting that are trying to sense what the church is, who the church is, what it believes. That's a process of bringing them along and of informing them and of shepherding them. But there often is discrepancy. There's always discrepancy to some degree between what a church officially believes, what the pastor, elders believe, what they're teaching, and what the random person on the pew fully understands, fully digests, fully embraces, fully can articulate, right? But if you have fuzziness up here, you're going to have an absolute fog in the pew. And so getting clarity there as to what the church believes covenantally and its covenantal expectations, its confessional expectations, what you're going to be preaching, what you're going to be championing, and then the greater clarity you have from that point, the more credibility you have personally to lead them that way, then you get increasing clarity and hopefully increasing conviction, hopefully a deepening sense of covenantal expectations in the pew. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me flip it around then. So
Sure.
what if I'm a member and I listen to you talking, I'm convinced from Scripture about this, but I go to a church that does not have meaningful membership? What would you say to me?
I would say, where is the leadership? Is membership not meaningful because they've had decades of not meaningful membership, and Zach's only been there 6 months, and it's going to take them a while to set things in order? And so if that's your church, you believe in your minister, your elders, and they're preaching the word, and you understand this takes time, then I would lean into it with them and support and be excited about what God's doing. But if you wake up one day and you're in the middle of, a church that's fundamentally just a pragmatic church, and they have no intent to treat membership seriously, and they functionally practice open communion, and discipline is something they would see as barbaric, well, then you're probably not in the right place, and you need to find a healthier church.
Well, and I told Dr. Allen, I think one of the things I appreciate about the talk is he really just kind of set the table for us. We're going to be talking about a lot of the ideas in the text that he kind of laid on the table for us, and we'll have a chance to drill in a little more deeper and to focus in on some of these topics. So I thought you set us up really well, which I appreciate. So I want to open up in the floor just a moment just to see if there's any questions, and we should have some microphones, I believe, if you have any questions. But before I do that, just any follow-up questions for Dr. Allen from you guys? Thoughts, comments, questions? Jeff, Philip, Sam.
I think the Second Thessalonians passage has kind of been underserved. I'd appreciated you pulling that one out.
Yeah.
Here to serve the Thessalonians.
There you go. Brian, any follow-up? Jonathan?
Great talk. As I told you beforehand, or a few minutes ago, I appreciate the way you went through those 9 themes. I thought it was very useful. I think often when people ask this question, is it really in the Bible? Sometimes I even say no, depending on what you're looking for. I think people today are looking for something programmatic. They're thinking Costco membership, country club membership, gas station rewards program. So they're looking for something very 20th, 21st century in the biblical text. And it's like, true, you're not going to find that. Rather, when you just adjust your expectations, which you did helpfully when you talked about you gave those series of pairs. You have 2 or 3 pairs. It's not this, but this, and I forget the exact language you used. But what you were doing there is helping us adjust our expectations of what we're looking for, so that when Paul says to the church in Corinth, who's that? Who are the Corinthians? Well, that just necessitates some sense of a self-identity of we are the Corinthians, not the Corinthian church, right? So you helped us walk through all of that kind of inductive reasoning, and in ways that just makes it plain. Like listening to you, like, yeah, who would deny that? I was like, duh.
Made you want to go work for 9 marks.
Yeah, something.
So if I could add a word, Zach, I do think, I think what often you're pushing up against in the local church level, again, random evangelicalism, capital E, so more conservative evangelicalism. It's this basic assumption that first century Christianity was exciting, exhilarating, spontaneous, non-institutional, subjective, not objective, informal, not formal, elastic, not structural, and it's all this just big ball of energy and excitement. I mean, we just got to get back to that.
And that's kind of reading ourselves into that.
Right. And so I just like to push back this morning and say, no, there's a lot more structure. I mean, if you read, which I know you guys do, you read the New Testament and you get the pastorals, I mean, it really is amazing how developed ecclesiology is, local church expectations are, practices we see. I mean, it's amazing how rapidly under the Spirit and the Word this has come together and say, like, no, it's here. So if you're going to get back to the first century, you're going to get back to taking membership seriously. Yeah. If you're going to get back to the first century Christianity, you're going to get back to, dealing with that sin in your midst seriously. Yeah.
God is a God of order. He's putting it in order. He has clear instructions for this, so we don't need to assume that. That's really good. Yeah.
One more thing that I appreciate about your talk. Don't underestimate the significance of the biblical theological, don't underestimate the significance of the biblical theological point. Was that 3?
I think it was number
2 or 3.
2, yeah.
2. How God has always marked his people off in the garden, in the ark. Abraham and his seed in the wilderness, or in Egypt, in Goshen, right? And then the wilderness. He's always marked his people off from the world. And then 2 Corinthians 6, come out from them and be separate, touch no unclean thing. Right, so I think that's just a crucial point for us to remember when we're explaining this to people. This is the entire Bible. He marks his people off, and we do not love the world by downplaying and diminishing that line.
All right, brothers and sisters, we'll have time for other Q&A and panel discussion, but just want to open up to the floor to see if there's any questions that you have from something that you heard from Dr. Allen's talk. We can bring you a microphone. Just raise your hand. Yep. And if you want to, if you do take a question, if you just give us your name and what church you're from before you ask a question, that'd be really helpful for us.
My name is Brandon Porter from City Church. I had a question about point 8 when you were talking about, what did you say here? It's essential to faithfully administering the Lord's Supper. And then you mentioned that your conviction specifically, was that membership was necessary for that. So could you just expound on that a little bit more and just expand that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would parse it just a little bit. First of all, it has been the historic understanding and teaching of Christianity that that baptism is a prerequisite to the Lord's table, okay? And so now I'm getting to the weeds here, I know, but Baptists understand baptism is only baptism immersed into. And so if Presbyterian brothers visiting our church that Sunday who's never been baptized, like they would not be invited to take the Lord's Supper. I realize that may sound strange or harsh. That's just a very traditional, clear Baptist teaching. I believe it's also a biblical teaching. So that's one little footnote there. Secondly, what I was saying is about the Lord's Supper is if you then take another step forward and reflect on it, I don't know how as a pastor, and I serve as a teaching pastor in a church right now in Kansas City, minister the Lord's Supper once a month. I don't know how to even fence the table or frame what we're doing apart from referencing to and understanding of church membership. So I say things, which is common to many people, I'm sure. We'll say something like this. As we come to the Lord's table, we're called from Scripture to examine ourselves. Even in this moment, throughout this service, under the preaching of the Word, the singing of hymns, reflect, ask the Lord to search your heart if there's any sin that needs to be confessed before you come to the Lord's table. You do not need to be a member of this congregation to observe the Lord's Supper. If you're a baptized believer in healthy standing or in faithful standing or in good standing with your local church and you're visiting with us today, you're invited to take the Lord's Supper too. As I'm then surveying a crowd again, I only know what I know, right? I'm not running an investigation in the context of the corporate service, but I am trying to shepherd wisely and to rightly put out markers. As I'm inviting into that participation, my points of reference are back to this local church or your local church and you being in good standing, and you can't be in good standing if you're not a member of a local church. Does that make sense? So that's what I'm doing. If it's in a more localized setting where you know the people and they're coming, it's a pretty static congregation, not a lot of visitors. Even the membership reality of them being a member in good standing with that church is something that's being signaled verbally. So I may have stretched that point a little bit. I don't think so. What I was trying to say is to rightly fulfill the scriptural exhortations around the Lord's Supper, I don't know how to do that without that being fundamentally a reference to church membership. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Maybe just to build on that too. I think when I'm talking to folks about this question, I'll use the illustration of a room. So you came in that, we all came in that door. Let's say that door is baptism. We're in the room of church membership now. We're baptized once. We come through here, and then the New Testament assumes that we stay in the room of church membership for the rest of our lives.
Right.
And so we're baptized once, and then we celebrate the Lord's Supper over and over and over. But the ordinances of baptism and the Lord's Supper are the door in and the door out. So if somebody falls into unrepentant sin and church discipline happens, then excommunication, you bar from the Lord's table, that's the door out. So ideally, that person never falls into unrepentant sin. We stay in the room together as followers of Christ. But that's why I would agree with Dr. Allen that baptism should precede the Lord's Supper, because the Lord's Supper is meant to be a tool that also says this is the way out if you are not following Christ. But how can you be taken out of something unless you've been brought in, which is the sign of baptism in that sense?
Right.
Yeah. Anything you guys want to add? Next question.
You got.
Where?
Over here.
Yes, sir. Name and church again. The longest serving pastor in our room, 42 years.
42 years.
Bill Rose. I'm at Cross Timbers Baptist Church.
In Cross Timbers, Missouri.
Cross Timbers, Missouri.
You're going to be the Jake from Carthage like last year. It's, some of you remember Jake from Carthage. This year we got Cross Timbers. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. But anyway, and this is basically because I have white hair and I have hearing aids and I'm old. But the fact of it is, your sermon was on YouTube, correct?
My sermon was on YouTube.
In chapel.
Yeah, it should be posted on the Samaritans YouTube page, correct?
Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to find out, because I missed some of the script. And the second thing, how long will it be on YouTube?
Till Jesus comes back, brother. Take your time.
You have a lot of confidence in YouTube.
That's right.
All right. Another question. All right, right over here. Yep.
So I'm Aaron Black from First Baptist Church in Mulvane, Kansas. I had a question reflecting the 6th point. Dr. Allen, you were talking about how the church is to faithfully set apart and call pastors to come serve them. And then you use 2 Timothy 4 the Paul's command to Timothy to preach and proclaim the word. So how do we apply that today in church culture about congregational ruling? Is the elder supposed to appoint the next pastor, or is it the church? And do you have any reference of the congregation appointing and calling pastors?
Hey, that's a very good question. And you are pressing in on just a debatable point, a sweetly debatable point, meaning minimally, what must a congregation do minimalistically to still be considered a congregational church or congregation-led church? I would argue that minimally, calling its pastor/elders, voting on pastor/elders is a minimal act a church needs to undertake to still be classified a congregational church as opposed to just an elder-led, self-perpetuating board church. I think there are additional responsibilities like approving an annual budget, the confessional statement, covenant, church covenant, those sorts of things are additionally important as well for a congregation to undertake to still be classified as a congregational church. But I do think setting apart, calling, identifying, calling, electing men to the presbytery, men to the eldership, to pastoral ministry is an act a church needs to undertake as a whole to still be classified as a congregational church. In other words, there are certain non-delegatable responsibilities. And I do have a category for delegatable responsibilities that a church would assign to a pastoral staff or assign to a body of elders or body of deacons. I'm very fine with that category. I do think we detect that in the New Testament. But I do think there are certain core non-delegatable responsibilities, and the setting apart or the calling of pastors is one of those. There may be a difference on this panel. I don't know, but I'm just telling you as I understand it.
I think we would all agree on that. And I think one passage that's really helpful to look to is in Acts 6. So this is before really elders and deacons are clearly established in the New Testament. But you either have deacons here, some people would say this is the first calling of deacons, or you have some kind of proto-office that kind of comes off and becomes elders and deacons. But the way we see the most detailed account, I think, of the way that people were chosen for these various roles. So it says in Acts 6, the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples, so speaking of the whole church, and said, "It is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men," and then it gives the qualifications. And the whole church was to choose these men. And so we have something similar in the pastoral epistles. There's qualifications given that the church is supposed to use. Paul doesn't say, choose these people that I know about. He says, tell the church to look for these kinds of people.
It's good.
We have time for one more question before we break. So
It's quick.
right up front here. Yeah, right there. You want to stand up, sir? Yeah.
My name is George Jalaru, and from the House of God Community Church. I'm a graduate of Midwestern. I started church planting after I graduated from here. But my question it has to do with point 1, where you said that people were added to the church, and the first example that we see there was that 3,000 souls were added to the church. Now, my question is, what are some practical advice now? You mentioned something earlier on about structure versus, and what are some practical advice that will help you to better structure to have membership? Like we look in 1 Timothy chapter 3, chapter 5, where it has like a list of weaknesses that should be put on the list. What are some practical advice that you can give us to better structure the church as well?
Look, I would say a couple of words to you, brother. Thank you for the question. First of all, back to what I said a few moments ago, every church has its own story, its own context, its own strengths, its own weaknesses, its own past elders and pastors, for better or worse. And so I think you just need to take a clear-eyed look at the congregation you have, not the one you wish you had, not the one you hope to have, the congregation you have. And you juxtapose that with clear biblical teachings, whether it's matters of membership like this conference or other marks of a healthy church, formerly one of the 9, or just other aspects of a healthy church we see in the New Testament, right? And you're looking to move down that continuum from the church essential to the church complete. And the 2 words I would leave you with is the word process and progress. I mean, what is the process you go about doing that with? Is this a congregational vote? Is this something you need to be discipling men to become elders? Like, what can you do to move the church to greater health and undertake that, understanding that you're looking for progress, okay? And so hopefully you see progress every year, the church becoming healthier than the year before. And before you know it, you've been there 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, and you look back and it's a fundamentally different church to God's glory. Healthier, believers more mature, new believers have joined. You know, the people who are not on board with membership and other aspects of just a functioning New Testament church, they kind of drift away, sadly as that is, that they kind of self-deport. And your church is becoming healthier. People in the city are aware, people in the town are aware, people that are serious about Christianity, discipleship, and worship and membership, they begin to come. And you look back in 10 or 12 years, you're sitting at a much healthier church. And there's a process you're moving towards, and you're measuring that progress and seeking God to give you progress. One of the things I always fear at a gathering like this is that you get several hundred people fired up to go back and split their church. You know, that's not what like I want. That's not what we want here. I do want you fired up to go back and take membership more seriously. I do want you fired up and say, okay, well, where are we on this whole compendium of the church essential and the church complete? What are the processes we can do, we can undertake to become healthier? What is the type of progress we pray God to give us and we can look to see and hope to see? A few things I would say more specifically to your question is, you know, church covenant is essential. And by the way, even the most non-biblical person in your church these days may actually be all for a church covenant because they'll detect that can bring added legal protection to the congregation. It's just funny how life cycles go. And so it used to be to bring a church covenant a decade or 2 or 3 ago could be a point of just real challenge. But now kind of every church has a lawyer or two or a wannabe lawyer or two that understands the importance. Oh, goodness, we better be clear about what we teach and what we believe and lifestyle expectations. If not, we might get sued next week. So our current cultural moment often makes these things far more compelling to even not so spiritually minded church members because of our new cultural norm. So a church confession is important, a church covenant is important, and some sort of membership class or process is essential. And with that, just some personal knowledge by elders or some of the elders or some of the staff of those who are actually joining. So again, you don't know their hearts, but the best you can discern, there is a credible testimony of faith. They have been baptized. They are joining for the right reasons. They intend to assimilate into the church, not just occasionally spectate. So those are some things I would say that the confession is important, the covenant's important, the church bylaws upholding these things are important. Some sort of membership class and pastoral staff, elders, ministry team being engaged enough to know who they are and why they're joining, their conversion story are important. I mean, if you're doing those 4 or 5 things, I mean, that puts you in a pretty good lane to go down to really see significant steps, to see significant progress, back to our word, see significant progress take place pretty quickly. Last thing. Yes, sometimes what will happen, guys will bemoan their church of how unspiritual it is, atheological it is, apathetic they are, while they are meanwhile adding additional unspiritual, atheological, apathetic people to it. And so, you don't make a pot of water cold by adding more cold water. You make a pot of water hot by adding hot water to it. Come on now. Call me, Brian.
All right, on that note, friends, if you didn't have a chance to ask your question, again, there'll be more panels. Just hold on to that question, and then we'll have a chance to talk through all these things during the panel, Q&A, and also during the breaks. And on that last question, I think it's a good question. It kind of transitions us into Brian's talk. So our next talk will be led by Brian, thinking through how do we move from just having membership as some thing that's collecting dust in the back room of our church and actually making it meaningful. So he's going to help us to think through kind of a meaningful membership. So it's 11:40. We're going to take 5 minutes break, and then we'll start at 11:45 for our next session.